they have a class action lawsuit basically saying they want equal pay for the men. And we're trying to do a deep dive and find out exactly where the discrepancies are between, because there's two arguments here, and we need to be clear about this. There's the pool of money that FIFA pays all the federations from the revenue that FIFA generates from the Women's World Cup. And that's a big number, but it's nothing compared to the men's tournament. I think the men's gross revenues for the 2018 World Cup were $4 billion, and I think it was about less than $100 million.
Right.
For the Women's World Cup. So let's take that out of the equation because that's a FIFA argument that they have to deal with.
Exactly
okay?
right.
What we're talking about here, and I think what the women for the U.S. women's national team are talking about here is saying, look, what we're getting paid from our own federation is less than the men who failed to qualify for the last World Cup, and we've won the last two damn things. And that's why we want to have equal pay. And I think that's the way when we have this discussion, we have to paint it in that picture because there's nothing any of us can do or the U.S. Soccer Federation can do about what the FIFA money is. But they can control what they pay their own employees. And we've been trying to find the exact numbers on that. And it all depends on what model you want to use and what parameters are. But in a best case scenario, the way we've been able to crunch the numbers, in a best case scenario, in any given year, the U.S. women's team is making about 11% less or 89% of what the men's team is making. And that doesn't seem to make any sense because they're the ones that are successful.
I guess this is the interesting part is you're right, putting away the FIFA side of things and looking at the U.S. I haven't seen a lot of people that have disagreed with the sentiment that, yes, the women should be paid at a minimum what the men are being paid by the U.S. Federation because of the way they've performed. Like, they have buoyed the perception of this program, of this federation through their success. And I think most people, and listen, one thing that we preach and claim to love in American sports is this idea of a meritocracy. Like, you go out there and you earn what you are given by nature of your play, and most people would look at what the women have done and would say, yeah, they have earned in this situation.
Yeah, you look at, again, let's stick with the federation here in the United States, okay? Not FIFA, because they're not going to be able to do anything about that. All right, at least not now.
And that's not the lawsuit that the U.S. women's
exactly
team is
right.
filing.
It's with the U.S. Federation, and the women's team between 2016 and 2018 generated about $900,000 more in revenue than the men's team for the U.S. Federation. So they have brought in more money. And how it breaks down, the pay structure is the contract for women. The women's everybody on the women's team makes a base salary of $100,000, and they can earn performance-based bonuses. The men's team players only earn bonuses. They don't have a salary. If you want to put it into their bonuses, the least of which, if they lose, they still make a $5,000 bonus. So if you do it on a 20-game scale, if both teams played 20 games and lost all 20 games, they would get paid the same amount, right? Because the women get paid $100,000 and they don't get anything for a loss. The men, it's only based on bonuses, and for a loss, they get $5,000. 5 times 20 is 100, so they'd have equal pay.
And so I think in that, like, the women's beef would be, all right, if we were all losing at the same rate, we would be equal. But because we're performing well, we do not get to make the same amount of money.
Let's go to the winning. If you use the same 20 games and say they won all the games, then the women would make 89%.
That's
just to what Trey said. To where that's where that number comes in off the 20 games and wins.
And that just doesn't seem to make any sense.
No?
Because, look, with the FIFA argument is a different one that no one here in this country can control. So I think we have to have that. Because the gross revenues are vastly different.
The sentiment around this seems to be, like, when we hear that conversation of the macro and then the thing that we're talking about here, which is a bit more micro, it reminds me a ton of college athletics, where we look at the pay-for-play thing and we put that off and people don't really want to touch that because it's this big, hard-to-move thing that we don't fully understand. But then we talk about image and likeness in college sports all the time, and we go, well, yeah, that makes sense. Duh, it's common sense. We look at that situation and say, yes, they should be able to profit off their image and likeness. This feels a similar brand of common sense where you look at this situation, and even if you want to do it, like we talked about, how you frame this can be a big part of it. If you want to frame it the way the U.S. Soccer Federation does, the people that are getting sued in this, the United States Soccer Federation points out that if you extend, because the women's team, they're suing them, they're trying to point out in certain time periods what they make. And if you want to use what the Soccer Federation wants to use, go back to the fiscal year of 2015 until now, so including a men's World Cup cycle. The men's team brought in $10.8 million for the federation. For the current World Cup cycle, the women's team is likely to have higher revenue since they won the championship and the men failed to qualify. So given the same parameters with what the women have accomplished by what they have done on the field, they will likely bring in more money. So no part of that equation says to them and says to anyone with a working brain, you should make less in this context.
Yes, absolutely. Look, what are sports? They're a result-based industry, right? It doesn't matter. The bottom line is, that's as our good friend Herm Edwards says, you play to win the game, right? That's why that's it. The other thing he said, that's the beautiful thing about sports. You don't just play to play it; you play to win the game, because that's why we keep score.
But from a pay structure, winning the game is great, and that's what the players are going for. But from a federation who is paying, they're going to say, "What are you bringing? Yeah. What are you bringing to us? What money are you bringing in?" Right? Isn't that what you base payoff a lot of times? What are you bringing to the table here? And Mike, you just gave the numbers. The women are bringing in more than the men.
Correct.
Because if the women,
that's the point I was making. They're winning more, so they're bringing in more.
If this is the same scenario and they're winning and the men still aren't qualifying, but the men are still making way more money, it's a tough argument to say. You could say we're winning, but they're going to say, well, the dollars aren't coming with it. And that's what you have to base a lot of times salary and bonuses off of. But they are making the money.
And I guess that's the thing is I kind of do the thing in my brain where every time, because this seems one-sided, like every conversation I've heard about this seems largely one-sided, to where this all makes an overwhelming amount of sense. And I get it's a lawsuit, so the federation is going to do what they need to do to win, because that's what lawsuits are. But I'd wonder what the logical counter argument, if there is one, that exists for this at this point. Again, just working with U.S. soccer and what we're doing for our male and female athletes, what is the logical counter to this? Because right now I'm really failing to see one.
Well, it's some of the same way we had the conversation about the netting. What's the downside of this? And the other part of this, we should point out, the lawsuit is based on the old collective bargaining agreement, which I think was before the women won the World Cup in 2015. And I understand why the women would use that as a jumping off point, because they're basically saying, look, we've been getting screwed for years, and we're still winning this thing. So let's not just about what's going on now. It's going about all those years where we were putting in all that time, and we were winning, and they weren't qualifying, and we still were making much less than the guys that weren't even showing up.
And it includes things like where they stay, where they're put up, all the ancillary things to go along with the training.
Yeah, it's how you're treated. It's the respect that you're given by the federation. All of those things play a factor into feeling like you're treated as an equal in this situation. And I think that's a great point. That's as much as anything else. And that's some of the things we heard Marta complaining about for Brazil, the way that they're treated. Like this is not specifically just a U.S. women's soccer problem, but for a team that's been overwhelmingly successful and overwhelmingly the high watermark in their sport, you can understand why it's probably even more exasperating.